can get this going.
Say it one more time.
Olasanoye. 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 Greetings, everyone. This is Leon with Pride in Providence, and today we're hanging out with Kevin Olasanoye, the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Democratic Party. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Leon.
Hey, I want to
be here.
Reason I had you out today is I wanted to talk about where you're from, you being from Providence. I want to, again, thank you for coming out to show your pride in Providence and, like I said, talk about where you're from, where you've gone, why you came back. What your goals are, and what's going on in your world, and how you're trying to change it, and help Providence, and also the state and the country.
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Providence.
Okay.
My parents lived on California Avenue when I was born, and kind of bounced around lower South Providence. We lived on New York Avenue. We lived in Ontario. We lived around the Elmwood Community Center.
Oh, okay.
And then my folks moved over to Upper South Providence. We lived at the old Omni Project on Friendship Street.
Okay.
And in '95, we all moved over to Silver Lake. We were one of the first people of color to live on Silver Lake.
Really? Okay.
And we've sort of been there ever since. I now own property in the same area, and I live in Ward 15 in Providence. So I'm a Providence kid. I went to parochial school, Bishop McVinney Elementary and Middle School on the south side of Providence, and then graduated from there. Went to classical, so I'm a proud classical graduate. Go Purple! And 2002, I graduated. Went to URI undergrad. I studied politics and economics, and then I started getting into politics in my senior year of college and been doing it ever since.
What spurred your interest, or what got your interest? I remember when I was in school, I was always the introvert, and I would always watch the news. And I happened to be in class one time, and I happened to mention a topic, and the teacher was like, "Hey, you're really interested in that? Why don't you join what was called Model United Nations?" What was your start? What got you to say, hey, this is really interesting?
Yeah, I think I've always kind of been civic-minded. Certainly, I think, I remember coming home as a kid, my father would always have the news on, the evening news, and I never really stopped after the 6:30 national news. He kind of was a very vociferous reader of the newspaper, and a consumer of hard news. But I had a social studies teacher, Louis Hebert, who's now the principal at Bishop McVinney School. But at the time, he was a social studies teacher, and he had this Jeopardy thing he used to do with his students, where the kids who performed the top 3 of his social studies class would do like a United States and history version of Jeopardy. And that really, I think, kind of sparked my interest in history and in politics and in social studies, and kind of thinking about ways that people interact with one another, and thinking about history. And that really just carried me ever since. I mean, all along the way I've had, particularly in Providence, I think, either teachers or mentors, somebody who kind of nurtured that interest that I had. I obviously had it in me to begin with, but I would be remiss if I didn't, say, there were people who understood or could see that was something I was interested in, and kind of
nurtured that pride.
Yeah, sure.
Nurtured that pride that you have in Providence to keep you going, and to recognize that, and to keep moving you along.
Yeah. And so when I got to high school at classical, I had 2. Obviously, classical is a great school. It's an institution, not just in Providence, but in Rhode Island. And I think around the country, frankly. We're really lucky in Providence to have that school. And the current principal, Scott Barr, was my history teacher.
Okay.
When I was there. I also had another teacher, Eddie DeRicio, who I took for 3 consecutive years. He taught us U.S. history, and then I took a AP course in U.S. history, and then I took an AP government and politics class. So I just really loved the way he taught, and I love the fact that he challenged us, and the subject matter was stuff that I was just super, super interested in. And so, over my time in classical, I was able to kind of take the same stuff that I had in middle school and kind of take it to the next level. And so by the time I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I was pretty sure I was going to go to law school, and I was pretty sure I wanted to work in government and politics. Didn't know how to do that, but certainly had the interest. And so I knew I was going to be a political science major as soon as I showed up on campus at URI in the fall of '02, and that's what I did.
Now, when you say you had that interest and you didn't know where to go, people coming behind you, if you want to give that information to or help someone, it's like, what did you do, or who did you seek out, or how were you able to get that information?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, especially as I sit in the seat that I sit in now as the executive director of the party, there just is not a critical mass of people of color that are in elected office. And so it's really difficult, I think, to get that type of information. What I will say is this, that I think anybody who's got a real interest in doing this work ought to spend a little bit of time talking to their local elected officials about how to get involved. I mean, that's basically what happened to me. I was a student in a class that was taught by the late Governor Sondland, who was teaching a political seminar in leadership. And we read Harry Truman's presidential memoir in that class. And it was I think the fall of '05. And as a part of the class, he had different elected officials come in and out of the classroom. And so we saw, then before he was Senator Whitehouse, we saw Lieutenant Governor Fogarty at the time. He was running for governor. There were a bunch of other elected officials who came in and out of the classroom. And I remember walking out of that classroom one day and the governor kind of asking me whether I'd be interested in volunteering or interning for somebody. And that's really how I got my start. I was a finance intern, and that turned into a job. And then I worked my tail off on that first election and learned a lot about the process and met a lot of people along the way who knew who at least thought that I had a little bit of skill and wanted to see and nurture that. And so they kind of pointed me in the direction of other things, and here I am. And so I think that the real thing is about kind of pointing kids in the directions of where to go. And I think, easy place to start is, their city council person, their state rep, their state senator. Go to City Hall and try to get involved. Try to give as much time as you possibly can. I think, one, it gets you the ability to learn 100%. Is this what I want to do? But the good thing is you're always giving back, which is, really what this work is about.
Well, what lessons have you learned that you now can say, okay, well, this is information that I can pass on, or, help the younger generation, or help, younger lawyers and people of color, like you say, get interested in, about politics, and say, you really need to understand it and get into it?
Yeah, God, I think there's so much. And I think it's hard to even really say in words. I think it's really about experiences. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've learned about the way our political process works, and not just the stuff that they teach you in the classroom, but how the sausage is actually made, is really by becoming a practitioner of the work. And so one of the things I always tell young folks as I talk to them about how to get involved and what to do is, you really got to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty doing this work. And I don't mean that in the sense that politics is a dirty game. I mean that in the sense that whether you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or whatever profession you want to be in, I think it's super important that you have experiences along with your sort of baseline knowledge. I think it's super important that kids go to college. I think it's super important to have a baseline level of education. But I also think that for people who decide that that's not for them, that there is a way to be able to get experiential learning that is super important. And I know, having been out of law school now a little while, that's where the legal profession is going, right? They're going, sort of further away from just a baseline core curriculum to trying to make sure that their students get a well-rounded education by getting as much experiential learning as possible. And so that means externships. That means you get out and you work for an attorney. That means you get out and you work for a judge. You get out and you sit in immigration clinics and all these kind of experiential components, because I think it's super important that kids do that and as well as get education. And so, whether it's law, which I have an intimate knowledge about because I went to law school, or it's politics, which I also have an intimate knowledge about. I think the most important thing that a person can do is to, make sure that they try to give back as much as possible by being there, by being a part of the process. And that's, to me, that's the lesson of 2016's election, is we just need to get people more involved, and that's what excites me about doing this work.
That and would you say communication along with education?
Yeah, sure.
Are two very important things to get out the vote and educate people, and especially with the era of what's going on right now, with the politics of what's going on. How do you help navigate that and gear to people to get them the information so they can clear up the false news versus the real news?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because people live really busy lives, and I think in the era that we live in, which is a 24-hour news cycle, right? Our attention spans are just not what they used to be, right? I remember as a kid watching my dad pretty much sit through an entire newscast, a half-hour newscast, and not move. But a lot of what he knew was supplemented by the reading of newspapers and articles, and I remember as a kid, Encyclopedia Britannica and things like that, right? People were really vociferous consumers of information, and I think the challenge that we have in politics today is I think that everybody has all the information at their fingertips in the post-internet world, but a lot of folks are not going to comb and cull through all that information, so part of what we have to do, part of what the challenge that we have to do, is try to distill really complex messages down to 90 seconds or so, and that can be difficult.
Well, something you mentioned is like say back in the day, you had the 6 o'clock news, you had your Peter Jennings, and you had your Sam Donaldson and all those, and you watched, and then in most cases you still had the paper print, and you would fact check with the paper print. Nowadays, it's like it's if it's not on my phone, and if I can't get it on my phone, I can catch it on my tablet or the television, and no one's fact checking like they used to.
Yeah, and our democracy only works if you have people that are engaged in a process on a consistent basis. The founders of the Constitution, when they wrote this document, part of what they were taking for granted almost is the idea that individual citizens were going to try to consume as much information as possible. And they built a government that allowed for that information to take place. To me, that's the heart of the First Amendment, this idea that you can say what you need to say in this marketplace of ideas, because there are going to be people out there that are going to consume it, and they're going to make decisions about whether or not they agree or disagree based on what they read, right? But that information is super important. It's, I think, the fundamental thing that we have to have in politics and government and everything that we do, is we have to have people having the same baseline information. To me, it's the reason why some of the things that we hear coming out of Washington, and the idea that like just basic facts are no longer up, they're up for debate now, right? We can have a conversation about opinions, or at least we used to, right? But we used to take basic facts to just be certain, right? And then you make arguments. It's what you do. It's what we're supposed to do. But kind of getting back to this sort of information, it's super, super important. And so, one piece of advice that I give to young people all the time is, don't get all your information from Facebook.
Right.
Try to read a newspaper every once in a while. Don't just click on the link. Maybe read the article that's underneath the link so that you get, and then try to read some more stuff so that you get a full, well-rounded picture. We make a lot of time to do a lot of things.
Right.
I'm guilty too. I spend a lot of time on my Twitter feed at nighttime, kind of scrolling through, or my Instagram or some of this other stuff. But as much time as I devote to that, I also devote to really hard news. And the reason is because it's my job as a citizen to make sure that I have the information, right? I think to put it on elected officials to do that is really scapegoating, right? I think it's important for them to give us the information, but as I said, I think the founders wanted to make sure that we had people who understood the information and had a baseline understanding too. And so that's what we got to get back to. And I think it certainly makes my job more interesting,
right.
But a lot of fun too. A lot of fun.
As we're closing out, I want to talk to you on the way out as far as your job as executive director.
Yeah.
What is your job as executive director to get the information out, or campaigning, or what do you do, and how are you helping the community, your party, and your people? Yeah.
So my number one job is to support candidates that follow or fly the Democratic Party's flag, and in my view that means that they lead with their values, that they are out there fighting to make sure that ordinary people's lives are better. Mm-hmm. Ultimately that's what my work is all about. It's less about the back and forth about certain things. It really is about when you go into a voting booth in September and November and you pull the lever for the Democrat, we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need, and that you ultimately believe that when you cast that vote, the reason you're casting that vote is because the Democrat that you're voting for is the person that you absolutely believe is going to make your life better. What's that's make sure your kids have a better education, okay, or make sure that you get health care, or make sure anybody who wants a job can have a job, whether that's fixing our roads and our bridges, whatever it is, whatever aspect of life that you live. I think Democrats do it better than Republicans, and I think my job is to educate people about why that's the case, so that when they go in the voting booth in November, they have all the information that they need.
With the 10 minutes that we have, what would you like the voters or the public to know about the candidates coming out? Not that we don't want to necessarily endorse any particular one, but if you were able to say, this is why you need to get out to vote, this is why we need to make sure as a party we're representing, because we need to change the culture. So with that being said, let the people know.
Well, so let me say this, that I think it's super, super important that people get engaged in our democracy. I've heard Congressman Cicilline say something that I want to repeat here today, which is that democracy is not self-executing. It doesn't just work because you show up to a voting booth, or sometimes you don't show up to a voting booth. Too often, I think in our culture, people take for granted that things just happen, or they just are the way they are. They only happen if you get involved. They only happen if you show up to vote. They only happen if you are a part of a process that makes this thing work. And so what was frustrating about 2016 for me was that too many people that I knew, too many people that I loved, took it for granted. And we say this every election cycle, but I'll say it now. The 2018 election cycle is one of the most important election cycles we will see in a long time. People will write about this election cycle 20 and 30 years from now. And my hope is that they're going to say this was the chance, this was the time where people stood up, they spoke out, and they got engaged, and we need you to be a part of that. So if you're looking for more information about the Democratic Party, come find us on, our offices are in Warwick, 200 Metro Center Boulevard. Our phone number in the office is area code 401-272-3367. You can find our website, ridemocrats.org. We need you to be a part of this process. We want you to be engaged, and really appreciate the time.
No worries. I mean, you know, and I'm glad you came, and I want to say is, you know, we want to get people out there engaged instead of what happens with a lot of people is they get complacent. It's like, oh, well, you know, this person's got to vote or this person's got it already. And I know I've been a part of a couple campaigns where that's happened and that person's lost by maybe 20, 30 votes.
Yeah.
And that's that 20 or 30 people that have sat home and said, oh, you know, my candidate's got it. And that's not how it works. We all have to show up and our vote does count. So again, I want to thank you for showing up today
Absolutely.
and coming out and
Thanks for
showing your
having
pride
us.
and Providence. And hey, have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
We're good if you are.
And we're good. All right.